Hi listeners, and welcome to Reasonable and Necessary, Australia's premier podcast series on everything you ever wanted to know about the National Disability Insurance Scheme, brought to you by the Summer Foundation. I'm your host, Dr. George Taleporos, and on today's episode, we're talking to the Shadow Minister for the NDIS, Bill Shorten, about what it took to create the NDIS and where it may be heading. Check it out. Hi Bill, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be on your show. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm very excited to talk to you today about the NDIS. I know it was almost 15 years ago when you and I first met, I think. It was at a conference, and I think it would have been about 2008. And you were the Parliamentary Secretary for Disabilities at the time. And you were giving a speech, as politicians often do at conferences, but it felt different to me. You were talking about the social model of disability. You were talking about the injustices experienced by people with disability, and I thought, this guy, I think he actually gets it. I was quite impressed back then. And what were your memories of that time when you first started in the disability field?
Well, I was brand new into Parliament 13 years ago, and I thought I'd seen unfairness as a representative of workers' rights and standing up for workers and seen unfair treatment of workers, but nothing prepared me for the systemic second-class exile to which Australians with disability were cast by the system, the sense of crisis in disability funding, that you had to be worse and worse off to get support, the invisibility and lack of power and money of people with disability. So I realised that we needed to change their power, and we needed to find a great deal more financial, economic resource for people with disability.
And there was a long journey that occurred after that. There was the Productivity Commission report that was developed, and there was obviously the introduction of the NDIS Act. Over 10 years later, Bill, we've got the NDIS rolled out across the country, and you had a big role in that. But it wasn't just you, was it?
Oh, no, it was lots of people. There was a grassroots movement. There were people with disability and the people who love them, people who work with them. Labor got on board with the idea. Jenny Macklin and Julia Gillard. We managed to get some sort of grudging bipartisanship out of the Liberals, but it was for me, it wasn't the goal of the NDIS even though that was important to me. It was how you organise people. And I believe in life that if you can get a lot of people who don't have power and equity and agency and bargaining strength, but get them all together, then they can become a formidable host, a formidable group. And that's what we did with disabilities. We took it from the back of the budget to the front of the budget, from the footnote in the newspaper to the front page, and that's what we wanted to do.
It was a big change. I remember because I started in the advocacy field in the early 2000s, probably a bit earlier than that, and it was so hard to get media attention on the issue of unmet need around disability, and suddenly, yeah, you're right, we were quite organised, and we were quite united, and we kind of were at a point where people were listening. The government was taking us seriously, and we were about to embark on a transformation that we'd never seen before. And I I think that's what the NDIS has become, a huge transformation.
And it's the flagship of how we should treat disability in Australia. But I worry that following last year's election loss and getting back into the NDIS world, that it's drifting. It's made a lot of difference and it does a lot of good. And we've come so much further than people could have imagined a decade ago when I was speaking at that conference. But having said that, I worry that it's got the wrong people running it. It's losing sight of the values of an individualised scheme based on rights as opposed to becoming an algorithm-driven ration system of welfare without the individual at the centre of the decision-making or priorities.
We'll get on to some of those issues in a second, but before I do, I just want to get a sense from you because um, the Act was developed, it was quite a progressive Act at the time, the NDIS Act. We're sort of moving into a time now when that Act is being looked at as something that needs to be amended. If you were to design the NDIS, with the hindsight we have now around, what we all know 10 years ago, is there anything that you would have done differently?
Well, hindsight's infallible, isn't it? So I think one thing we'd have to reconsider if we had our time again was we said that people above the age of 65 didn't need to be covered by the NDIS Act if they had a disability because aged care was working. Now, I'm not saying how we fix it, but I think there's a real cliff which people with disability, if they're over 65, are now just getting a very rudimentary aged care support. And it shouldn't be your age which determines the level of disability care you get. So I don't have an answer to that, but I think it's a problem. We've got to speak honestly. I also think that keeping the state's feet to the fire in some matters is important. The federal government's been hopeless with their independent assessments and cuts and whatnot, cuts and by stealth. But I think the states need to be more engaged. The federal level of government needs to be better at engaging the states on some of the states' responsibilities, such as schools, for example. And I think a third issue is I think we need to look at how we design in people with disability into the highest structures of the board and the administration of the scheme. I think that's a weakness of the current government, that people with disability aren't at the big tables helping make the big decisions.
I think you're right. I think that when the governance structure was established, I think that it would have been very, very smart at the time to set some quotas around the representation of disabled people. We have the Independent Advisory Council that does a great job, but they're not the ones making the decisions. So it's really critical that that people with disabilities are, A, fairly represented and B, seen as, integral to the governance of the scheme. People that live it and breathe it, right?
Exactly. I mean, it's not really a legislation issue, but it's a government political will issue that we're in danger, as Bruce Bonahady has said, of creating an oasis in the desert, that everyone wants to be on the NDIS because there's a lack of supports for people with disabilities who might need a full NDIS, but there's nothing else available for them.
Yeah. I think that the technical term in the Productivity Commission was the Tier 2 and the broader mainstream service system. And, I'll talk about the mainstream service system a lot, and the fact that the NDIS was never designed to replace every single hole in government services, and we really need the National Disability Strategy to step up. I mean, I think I remember meeting you, Bill, again at the the launch of the 2010 one back in those days, and we haven't had a lot about the NDS.
No, we've got to get buy-in from government and the community, but that's why I think the NDIA should be champions of the National Disability Strategy, and I think the government should be champions of it because we've got to tell everyone else this is important.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, you probably hear, you're the Shadow Minister for the NDIS, you would hear a lot about the concerns that people have and the issues that people are experiencing. Are you able to maybe share with us what maybe the top three issues that have been raised with you about how the NDIS is currently
Yeah,
working?
here's three.
Yeah, sure.
Inconsistent and unfair decision making on people's plans. Two, people are getting their plans cut. There seems to be a real program of the government to cut people's packages. And three, decisions take too long. The waiting times people get answers and variations and information back. So they're the three things. If you wanted me to prioritise, it's inconsistent, unfair decision making, cuts to people's packages by stealth, and drawn out waiting times. And with this waiting times, the NDIS shouldn't be like Little Bourke Street where all the traffic goes in one direction, and that's a street in Melbourne which is a one-way street. Like at the moment, I feel the participants have got to keep jumping through hoops to satisfy the NDIA. But there's not the same reciprocal respect and mutual obligation from the decision maker to the people seeking decisions.
Can I take that first one, the inconsistency in decision making, Bill? I'm really interested in this because we've heard the government talk about the postcodes and that the richer the postcode, the worse the plan. I've also seen some analysis that says that, well, it's actually the component of SAL or SIL, supported independent living, that has been skewing the numbers. There's a few different perspectives on that.
I think there's a little bit of truth in each of the perspectives. But the government's answer to some people getting good packages and others are not is to make it harder for people to get good packages. So they're in a race to stupid, and that's what the government's trying to do, cut back. I think decisions should be, in some cases, published so everyone else can see what the criteria is. I think we should almost have a Wikipedia of NDIA decisions so people can see what's going on and everyone's working off the same information. Too much of NDIA decision making, in my opinion, is done in a black box like a magician, and we can't actually see what's happening in the black box.
So the transparency is key, is that what
I
you're
think
saying?
transparency is part of it. I think training up, I think having more direct employees of the agency rather than labour hire. I think as an organisation, it builds its own knowledge over time, but there's such a high staff turnover that lessons get forgotten by new people because they never get passed on.
Yeah, and I'm thinking that we need to really train the planners to do the job in a way that's a respectful and be consistent, and also I feel like we need more people with disabilities in these roles, so people who really understand what it means to have a disability.
Yep, 100%.
What are your thoughts, Bill, on the sustainability of the NDIS? There's been a lot of talk about this, and we've been hearing that costs are going up, and we all want the scheme to be sustainable. We want the scheme to be there for the long haul, and we also want people to receive funding that's fair. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I fundamentally don't trust the government. Like, if they say it's raining outside, my best advice is go outside and have a look for yourself. Like, if they say the scheme's not sustainable, they should provide all the information they make the decision on. And I think part of what they say makes the scheme not sustainable is there's too many people getting packages. There's not a quota on disability in this country. You can't just say after you've got 100 people with dementia that the 101st person with dementia shouldn't get funding, or that after funding 100 children in early childhood with early childhood intervention packages, that the 101st child diagnosed with developmental delay shouldn't get a package because they're full up already. So, one, I don't trust them. Two, I want to see their information that they say that there's a crisis. Three, I think they have to be prepared to accept that if we've got more people with disability than we initially thought, that doesn't mean you shrink the scheme. Now, I do think you've always got to be on your guard for wasted money and service provider overcharging, but I don't I don't buy that there's some catastrophic disaster happening in the NDIS. I just think the government would rather spend money on other things than people with disability.
Other things that you think need to be done to save
Yeah,
money?
yeah. I do think maybe we need to start having an independent pricing authority. I think we need to have more direct hire staff and labour hire staff. I think we want to revisit the litigation strategies where they spend money on lawyers rather than just accommodating people's claims. I think they need to encourage more innovation in the housing area rather than just sitting on people's supported independent living packages. I think that they need to have a conversation with the states about the states properly funding the school system rather than parents supplementing their child's education with NDIS money. I think timely decision making would improve people's mental health and also the amount of paperwork that people have to handle. So there's some simple propositions.
The election isn't that far away. And I'm really interested, people listening are gonna want to know, if there is, Labor government next year, what are some changes that they or that they could expect with the NDIS, and what's your long term vision?
We've got to make sure that the NDIS is returned to its original vision of choice and control for people with disability at the centre of decision making. So, more people with disability in decision making roles at the NDIA, a plan to develop the workforce, a plan to work better with the states. I think we need to really cement in customer obligations from the agency so that decisions are made in a timely fashion. I think that we need to do better at what we said earlier in the podcast, the tier two support, so that not everyone needs to come to the NDIS. I think we've got to have more social procurement of services provided by people with disability in the Commonwealth. I think the Commonwealth needs to be an employer of choice for people with disability. I think we need to do a lot more about encouraging people to employ people with disability. I think we need to encourage people with disability to get involved in our political system. I want to make sure that information's transparent and that we don't just have an NDIS, but we have a national disability strategy, of which the NDIS is a flagship program.
Yeah, I think they're very, very good initiatives, Bill. And to all of the Australians with disabilities that are listening and watching, do you have any final words that you'd like to leave us with?
The core challenge of people with disability from a political viewpoint is to have more political power and to have more economic resource. Not voting and not participating in the political system just leaves the system to people who don't care about disability. So get out, talk to your friends, talk to your family, talk to the people you work with, talk to the carers. Build a coalition for disability such that no political party runs for election without a fair income platform of doing more for people with disability. And that's the way that we maintain and improve the relative share of power and money which people with disability have in Australian society. I want us to be the best in the world. Nothing less is acceptable.
Thank you, Bill, and thanks for your
Oh, same with
advocacy.
you, George. You do a great job, mate.
Thank you, Bill. That's all we have time for on today's episode of Reasonable and Necessary, brought to you by the Summer Foundation. To be notified of future episodes, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay well and reasonable.